Great to see all of you this morning, and great to have just a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about manufacturing here in southwestern Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh. And I know we've got some folks joining us from way out in Oklahoma, so hopefully some of the things we talk about here about our region will resonate and make sense out there as well. Doug mentioned I have spent 40 years working, telling the Pittsburgh story, first at KDKA and now at Channel 11 WPXI. And I really lived a lot of the transformation of Pittsburgh and the regional economy, from the collapse of our steel industry in the 70s and the early 80s to really rebuilding the entire economy, and a lot of opportunities, especially in manufacturing. And I can tell you, as powerful as Pittsburgh was 150 years ago as one of the great manufacturing centers on planet Earth, I think the upside and the excitement about manufacturing around here right now surpasses what we ever experienced before. This truly is one of the most exciting times for anybody interested in a career in manufacturing, and a lot of that has to do with technology. Back in the heyday of Pittsburgh as the steel city, it was a lot of manual labor. It was a lot of brute force. That's how things got done. If you were working in the iron pit over at the Cary furnace or one of the big steel mills down in McKeesport, you were shoveling ore all day, and you were doing it by hand, and you were probably debilitated by the time you turned 40 years old, because just that piece of the job was so hard to do. And it was dangerous, it was hard work, but it was also what forged the character of Pittsburgh. People around here have never been afraid of hard work, they've never been afraid of a big challenge, and they've never been afraid of really getting close to the manufacturing operation and putting their hands on and making some things happen. I remember years ago I was down at the Edgar Thomson Works in Braddock, and they had just installed a new continuous caster to make the slabs for the steel there. And I was up in the pulpit, because of course by then it was all computerized, right? They weren't down there on the line, in the middle of all that heat and everything. And I talked to one of the steel workers up there who was running the machines. And I asked her, I said, you like this? You really like this? You're in an air-conditioned pulpit. You don't have to be down there by all that molten steel anymore, by those hot slabs and everything. Isn't this great? And she says, well, yeah, it's comfortable. She says, what I really like the most is when something goes wrong, and then I have to pick up a wrench and go down there and fix it. So it's been that combination of people willing and capable to run the machinery and run the computers and do all the things it takes in modern manufacturing to make it all work, but also always willing to, pick up a tool or use their hands or whatever to really keep the facilities going. And that's important, because manufacturing is still an incredibly important part of Pittsburgh, of our whole economy, of all of southwestern Pennsylvania, in fact, of the United States. I'll say that to the folks out in Oklahoma, because even though it doesn't employ as many people as it once did, it's not as big a sector as it used to be. In terms of wealth creation, it may be the single most important sector, economic sector we have in any region in the country. And it's pretty simple why. When you're in manufacturing, you're making things, right? You're taking raw materials, you're taking parts, and you're assembling, or you're making them into something bigger and better that somebody's going to want to buy. And more often than not, once you make that thing, it's going to get sold somewhere else, right? Yeah, we'll sell some here in southwestern Pennsylvania, we'll sell some in Oklahoma, but more likely it's going to get sold all the way across the country, or it's going to get sold all the way around the world. And every time that happens, somebody pays for that thing you've made. And that means that money's coming back here. It's bringing wealth into the region. And there's really no other sector as powerful as manufacturing for bringing wealth into the region. And you bring wealth into the region, you can pay people better, they can own more houses, they can drive better cars. And so as a wealth creation engine, manufacturing continues to be one of the most important economic sectors that we have in southwestern Pennsylvania. And so that's why my colleague Patty Horvatich here from the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance and I are always so excited to see so many people who are interested in manufacturing, because we know that in terms of growing the regional economy, the manufacturing is really the engine that's going to make it possible to do everything we want to do here in the region. If you have more wealth, you can have better parks, you can build more bike trails, you can afford stadiums and sports teams and all the other things that make our quality of life great around here. The manufacturing is really the engine that does that. But as I mentioned, that's kind of the steady state for manufacturing. That's what it does for us all the time and has been doing around here for a century or so. But I think the most exciting times are ahead. And as I mentioned, a lot of that is because of technology. Because what's been happening here in Pittsburgh, really across the country, but I think we have some extraordinary capabilities here, is the marriage of manufacturing and technology, manufacturing and computers, manufacturing and all new types of digital ways of approaching solving problems and making things. And there's really three areas where Pittsburgh is now a leader in the United States. And one of them is called, has anybody ever heard of 3D printing? Anybody ever done a 3D printing thing? Good, okay, so you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, it's really cool, this additive manufacturing where you layer by layer, you create, layer by layer you create the part or and then rather than having to forge it or manufacture it traditionally. And it's creating a whole new era as we look to the future. Instead of mass production, that's what Henry Ford did over a century ago when he came up with the Model T, and there would be exactly the same black car in everybody's driveway, everybody in the country, and that was a revolution. What they're talking about nowadays is mass customization. That means your part doesn't have to look the same as your part, and it doesn't have to do the same thing as your part. Every single part someday could be modified to just suit the customer's needs. So it opens up a whole new world of potential in terms of how we can make things and what we can do with the things we make. And it turns out Pittsburgh, our region, is really becoming a national leader in thinking about how that's going to happen. We actually have an organization, it's actually based halfway in between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, called America Makes, and it is the National Additive Manufacturing Research Center. So there's dozens of companies, dozens of universities up and down the Ohio line, right? Actually from Morgantown all the way up to Cleveland, that are all working together to try to figure out what do we do with this 3D printing thing? What do we do with additive manufacturing? What's it going to enable us to do in the future, enable manufacturers to do in the future? So we're a hotbed of this right now in southwestern Pennsylvania. So it's a really exciting time to be in manufacturing in that sense. Another area that's really growing very rapidly around here is robotics in manufacturing. And we actually have another national center here called the ARM Institute, the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute. It's over in Hazelwood Green on the Mon River, closer down to the mouth of the Mon, in Hazelwood, in the city of Pittsburgh. And that's another research institute. Dozens of universities, dozens of companies all across the country. They're all working together to figure out how do we automate manufacturing. If we can't find enough people, or the people we have, we want the high-skilled people to run the machines and to make the most money, but we have to replace some of the laboring types of jobs because it's getting harder to find those low-wage, low-skilled people to do a lot of this kind of work. So why couldn't a robot do that work? So they're investigating ways to apply more automation, more technology to various aspects of manufacturing, so that the people who are the people in those facilities then are doing the higher value work, the really creative work, the really important work, and the work that pays more money. And we'll let the machines do all the drudgery work. So there's an ongoing activity down in Hazelwood called the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute that's really leading the way for the whole country. And the whole idea is a company like this one, a DMI, will be able to go head-to-head with a company in China or Vietnam or wherever else in the world, in Thailand, and be able to compete because we can bring in technology they don't have available, and we'll be able to make sure that our manufacturing industry can compete. And the final thing I want to talk to you about is just an emerging effort here in southwestern Pennsylvania, where again, we are in the lead nationally in what's called a Build Back Better program. And that's an initiative of the federal government. And our region here in southwestern Pennsylvania recently won a $67 million federal grant to expand our robotics and autonomous sector industry throughout southwestern Pennsylvania. Has any of you been into town? You seen any of the robot cars driving around town? Any of the Argo or Aurora town? Yeah, if you go to the Strip District, you go in downtown, some of you see them in Oakland, they're just tooling around. We're kind of getting used to having robots in our streets here. They've been tooling around now for the past 20 years or so. Well, that's just the beginning of where we think we can go in autonomous systems in southwestern Pennsylvania, because that industry was really invented here. It was invented here around 1980 after the accident at 3 Mile Island, when they needed a way to go into the nuclear power plant in the wake of the accident. It's too dangerous for a human being to go in there, right? So they asked some folks at CMU, can you design a little robot to go inside that nuclear power plant and take a look around and see what's inside there so that we can figure out how to fix it? That was really the birth of what's called field robotics or autonomous systems in the United States. Happened right here in Pittsburgh. and in Harrisburg by the nuclear power plant. Well, that was the beginning of what became the robot cars that we now see around town. They're testing them now in Austin, Texas. You can actually take a lift in Austin, Texas with a robot car that was actually created here in Pittsburgh. But it's more than the cars. There's companies here in Pittsburgh that are automating entire warehouses so that the forklifts are robots. And the entire control system that knows where every single item is on every one of these shelves can automate the entire system of stocking the shelves, supplying the customers, making the machines move around. There's another company in Pittsburgh that's developed a technology that you'll see at Sam's Club or at Walmart. And it's a robot that slowly goes up and down the aisles and does all the inventory control, checks what's on every shelf and reports it back so they know how to, when they need to order and what they need to order. And I mention that because the goal is to not just install these robots, but our goal in the region is to make the robots. And that's where it gets back to manufacturing. Can we reach out to the 3,000 manufacturers all over southwestern Pennsylvania, and can they get into the supply chain to create the parts and the technologies and everything it's going to take to make this more automated system work? That's the big opportunity for Pittsburgh right now, we think. And we think we can become a national leader in terms of how this is going to move forward. And if we can get in early and really establish this part of the United States as the center for that kind of manufacturing, we have a potential for southwestern Pennsylvania to be the robot city, the way that a century ago we were the steel city. So I think this is an exciting time to be thinking about a career in manufacturing and what you might be able to do. And I would just leave you with one thought. It's this new kind of manufacturing, it's going to demand a lot of everybody who's involved in it, right? Because you're going to have to be able to run a computer. You're going to have to be able to think about the math and some of the science involved and the engineering involved in making it all work. But there's going to be lots of jobs, not just for people with 4-year degrees, but for people with 2-year degrees, people who go to career school. It's an entire industry that's being invented and created here right now. There's a huge upside, but we're hoping that we can get more and more people interested in it because we're going to need everybody we can find to get excited about this, and even more important, to help invent the future of manufacturing. So I hope you really have a wonderful experience today. Hope the folks at DMI will whet your appetite and get you excited as well. But all I can tell you is an enormous upside if we can all figure this out together, and it's really a future that all of you are going to create. So thank you very much.